But it changes the way we read things when we hear that somebody's giving their opinion, their idea, their research, their writing, their brain engaged. Hey folks, welcome to the channel, Trickle Down Philosophy. I'm Don. That's the name of the channel for now. It had been Thinking Theology, which is not a channel dedicated to establishing theology, but it centers around theological topics, atheistic topics. Anything that counters theology is fair game for the channel, just as much as people who are like pro-theology. I'm agnostic. I'm right in the middle. I had been a couple decades ago. What you'd consider a fundamentalist Christian. Hardcore, believed the Bible was the Word of God, and the group I was with had the right opinions. And there was extensive research that showed that my position was wrong, and in fact, the core of my faith was incorrect, and it was very uncomfortable, but liberating over time. That said, I'm a philosopher by nature, majored in philosophy at Rutgers, and I just love lines of thinking and analyzing them. So this one is, was the law, the Mosaic Law, really a curse? Was it really a bondage? Now, Christians who believe in original sin and God's means of dealing with mankind say that Jesus fulfilled the law. He was the end of the law. And Paul, in some of his writings, as we'll see, said pretty strongly that the law was a curse, that the law was a bondage, and so forth. I'm going to be taking a look at that. I'm not Jewish. I'm not Christian. I'm just me. I guess we could put it that way. I don't really fit in any group. I'm more a philosopher by nature. Anybody could look at arguments and analyze them. Say you observe two people, you don't know either of these people, but you happen to be standing in line and the person says to the other one, hey, I'm in the market for a 4-door SUV. What's a good car dealership around here? And the person directs him to a bookstore. And you're observing this and you're like, oh, that makes no sense. So you don't have to be part of a particular group to be able to make sense of arguments. Experience within a group certainly helps. And I'm going to touch on that a bit as far as contemporary Jews saying, and contemporary observant Jews saying that the law was never a curse or a bondage to us. But not only does the idea that Jesus fulfilled the law and that the law was a curse, there are certain issues with that, one of which is the idea that God doesn't change, right? Established in the Hebrew Bible. I did a video on this recently in Malachi 3:6, and then in James. God doesn't change, right? So this is according to the text. I'm not saying I believe it. I'm not saying I don't. I'm just saying as a matter of argumentation, the idea in the Bible, God doesn't change. He's the same today, yesterday, forever. Various verses that refer to God as such. So there's an apparent contradiction here, or something that needs to be reconciled, that the way in which he dealt with mankind in a very big way, arguably the biggest way, he changed that. He went from the law and people atoning for their own sins to, you know what, I'm going to have this guy Jesus die, and that will be the atonement for all you people. Just believe that he made a sacrifice for you. Now, that is also contradicted in the Mosaic Law and in the writings, that one person may atone for another person's sin. Blood sacrifice is also forbidden in the law, under the law, and yet Jesus was a blood sacrifice. So there are various things that need to be reconciled, and many folks think they cannot be. But I'm going after one strain of thought, that the law was a curse, just to expose you to a different way of approaching it. But I'll start with what Paul, or what is attributed to Paul and his brethren, what he wrote in Galatians 3:13. Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone that hangs on a tree. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law. And then in Galatians 5:1, stand fast therefore in the liberty wherein Christ has made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. So now the law was bondage. And I'd always accepted that as gospel, even though it wasn't in the Gospels, but I'd always accepted that as, oh yeah, that it's horrible. 613 laws in the Mosaic Law covering all sorts of behaviors. And I thought, God, that is atrocious. Like, that really is a bondage. How do you even remember them all? Well, let's compare that to how we live in contemporary free society in America. We live with laws far more than we imagine, far more than 613, and we are aware of all of them. Just about all of them. They modify our behavior just as far as driving goes. Our automobile, I'll just peel off a few that I wrote down off the top of my head, just to give you an idea of how many laws we actually are aware of in our daily lives, to put that number 613 in perspective and see whether it's really this horrible yoke or bondage. When we drive, we must observe speed limits. Those speed limits change as we drive too. We have to use turn signals. We stop at red lights. We cannot make a left on red light. We have to stop for pedestrians and crosswalks. We have to move over a lane if there's an emergency vehicle on the shoulder. Cannot text and drive. No drinking and driving. No talking on cell phones. We can't throw litter out the window. We can only park in certain places. We can't drive on someone's lawn. We have to have our vehicle inspected every so often. We must carry a driver's license. We have to have insurance. We have to register the car. We cannot drive on the shoulder. Our brake lights must work properly. Our headlights must work properly. And we legally have to clean snow off the roof of our cars in the winter because it's a danger when it blows past us. We can't drive with our bright lights on, and so on. You get the point. And that's just driving. And any driver gets introduced to that, and you incorporate it into your lives, and you know that you must abide by those laws. And right there, I don't know, I guess they peeled off about 15 of them, and that was just one small facet of life. You could get into tax law when April 15th rolls around. You know what that means. Got to file your taxes, state taxes, federal taxes. You go into a store, you're hungry, you may not have much money, but you can't just take the item off the shelf. You're not allowed to eat within the store. Our behaviors are constantly modified by the law in America. In the UK and Germany and in Japan, every place has pretty much similar laws in these regards. And we know what those laws are. You can't loiter outside a place. You can't hit people. You can't yell fire in a crowd. So there are so many restrictions on our behavior. Things that we must do, like carry car insurance. Things that we cannot do, like drive 100 miles an hour on any road, really, but certainly not in a residential road or in a 65. So now let's put it in context of the Mosaic Law, where there are 613 prescriptions and proscriptions about, what sorts of plates you can do. Some are dairy, some are for meat, and these sorts of things. How far you can walk on the Sabbath day. When to observe Shabbat or Sabbath. So the Christian ideology, gleaned from the New Testament, gleaned primarily from Paul, who may have been a disgruntled Pharisee, and that maybe he wasn't a disgruntled Pharisee, but he certainly came hard against the folks that he used to run with, that he said that the law was a burden, okay? Now, it was certainly a burden to him. He no longer enjoyed it, and he said Jesus was the way now, so you don't have to do this. He spoke pretty harshly about the law. It's contradicted by Jews' testimonies to observant Jews who say the law is not a bondage. We actually love it. Think about a community, your own family, and your own psyche, knowing that from Friday night sundown to Saturday night sundown, you are taking that time off to power down, to reflect, to get out of the rat race of life. You're going to spend it with family. That can be pros or cons, but you get to know the people you are with, right? Preparations are made. The food is all prepared. You're not supposed to do any work for that 24-hour period. And this is ingrained into your regular life. And How nice is that, though, knowing that regardless of what's going on out there, you're orienting your life around time off. So is it really that bad? And then when the time, that day, when Shabbat is over, then you break your fast and you eat. The food has already been prepared ahead of time, and you're allowed to open the refrigerator door, and you're allowed to heat the food up, and you're allowed to do these sorts of things. So you sort of begin by eating. And this is just a very pleasurable thing. So is that really a curse or a bondage? And now I'm going to add an additional component here, is that, was this just Paul's opinion? Because I know folks, and I used to look at the Bible as the Word of God. God dictated to people, especially in the New Testament, when you're a fundamentalist Christian, the New Testament was dictated by God. These various people just dutifully wrote down what God wanted them to say. Now, did anybody ever give their opinions in the New Testament? Well, yes, many, many times they expressly said, I'm giving you my opinion on things, which stands against the notion that God was the author of these works and says these people were giving their thoughts on things, and that places it in a different context. Did Paul ever give his opinions? Absolutely. We'll read some of them. And the reason I'm going through this is just to help you consider that perhaps when Paul said the law was a curse, the law was a bondage, that he was merely giving his opinion as a former Pharisee, at least according to the texts. And if he did give his own opinion, what does in certain places, is it possible that he gave his opinion about the law? Paul was an extremely opinionated person when you read the text. He was constantly speaking about how he stood face to face with this person. And if you think you're so smart, I'm more educated than you. I mean, Paul was not shy about the person that he thought he was. All right, but let's look in 1 Corinthians 7:10-12. I'm just going to read a couple of verses to show you that Paul gave his opinions. Not that he took dictation from God, but that he was inserting his opinions into it. And he let you know that they were his own opinions. 1 Corinthians 7, verses 10-12. To the married I give this charge, not I, but the Lord. So here he's saying, the Lord is saying this. The wife should not separate from her husband, but if she does, she should remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband, and the husband should not divorce his wife. To the others, or to the rest, I say, I, not the Lord, say that if any brother has a wife who is an unbeliever and she consents to live with him, he should not divorce her. So now Paul is encroaching on what might be the Lord's territory, if you will. He's saying, here's my opinion on how you should handle your business. In 1 Corinthians 7:17, right, same chapter. All you can do is lead the life that the Lord has assigned to you and lead the life to which God has called you. This is the rule I am setting in all the churches. Notice, he's setting his rule. He's not saying this came from God or Jesus or anywhere else. I'm setting this rule in the church. Same chapter, 1 Corinthians 7:25-26. Now concerning the betrothed, or the unmarried, I have no command from the Lord, but I give my judgment, my opinion, as one who by the Lord's mercy is trustworthy. I think that, in view of the present distress, it is good for a person to remain as he is. I think that. He's giving you his thoughts. 2 Corinthians 11:21-23. To my shame, I must say, we were too weak for that. But whatever anyone else dares to boast of, I am speaking as a fool. I also dare to boast of that. Are they servants of Christ? I am a better one. I am talking like a madman, with far greater labors, far more imprisonments, and so on. So listen to that language there. I am speaking as a fool. I am talking like a madman. He's clearly giving his ideas about the way things ought to work. 2 Corinthians 13:10. For this reason, I write these things while I am away from you. So he's giving his reasons, right? that when I come, I may not have to be severe in my use of the authority that the Lord has given me, and yada, yada, yada. So Paul gave his opinions throughout his writings. These were his thoughts. Now, when we think it's the word of God, when we read words like the law is a bondage, the law is a yoke, the law is a curse, is it possible that that's one person's opinion who would change his mind from being an observant Jew to one who says, you know what, enough of this. On my road to Damascus, Jesus appeared to me. I was blind for 3 days and couldn't talk, basically. And then when I finally recovered from my trip through the desert in high heat, I realized the errors of my ways and was no longer going to observe the law. And Jesus was now the way to go. Food for thought. I'm not saying one way or another. I have my ideas on this, obviously. But did anybody else give their opinions in the text? Yes, I've done a video on this, on how they did. In Luke 1:1-4 was the eye-opener for me when Luke said that the reason he wrote was because other people had given their accounts of what had taken place. So he researched it and decided to give his account. Not that God told him any of what he wrote. Doesn't mean that what he wrote was wrong. I'm going to say it like that. But it changes the way we read things when we hear that somebody's giving their opinion, their idea, their research, their writing, their brain engaged, their presentation of what they think took place. But now in Galatians 1:1, this little part here about people inserting their opinions into the text and how they can be read. Galatians 1:1. Now, is this Paul giving his opinion? Or is this God telling Paul what to write? Paul, an apostle, not from men nor through man, but through Jesus Christ and God the Father who raised him from the dead, and all the brothers who are with me, to the churches of Galatia. That's the beginning of this letter. Paul and all the brothers that are with him are doing this writing. That does not bespeak dictation. That does not bespeak that these are words from God himself, who doesn't change. These are words of people giving their account of how things operate. Now, you can choose to believe these people. Anybody can. I don't disparage anybody who believes these words. That's not my point. My point is, when you read something like the law is a bondage, the law is a curse, when it was in fact something that God instituted according to the Hebrew texts. Now, I'm not Jewish. I'm not a great defender of anyone in particular, let's say. I like it when people get along and are considerate of other people and are actually thinking. If somebody is an Orthodox Jew, I have nothing bad to say about that. If somebody is a fundamentalist Christian, I have nothing bad to say about that. If somebody is an ardent atheist, just believes in the rule of science or physics or math, I have nothing bad to say about that. If the person is kind, thoughtful, and somewhat engaging, open to new ideas and curious, I'm perfectly fine with that. I can handle my own beliefs. I don't need you to come at me with yours. I will consider what your ideas are. But when it comes to the notion that the law was a curse, perhaps the idea that you live with far more than 613 laws in your daily life might put it into perspective that it might not have been the yoke or the bondage that you considered it to have been, and perhaps maybe be a little bit less tense. If you're militant, a little less militant. If you are militant, you probably haven't made it this far in the video, but in any case, that you might be a little bit more understanding, compassionate, or just less opinionated against folks who either observed the law or who still do. So, just go to the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn. There are plenty of opportunities to see folks who observe the law. All right, folks, please subscribe if you've made it this far. I appreciate that very much. It helps move things along. Have a great day, and I'll see you on another video.